This is rather like dropping a nuclear bomb on fiat currencies.
They now have to keep printing or we crash.
We've got this ticking time bomb.
Talking gold with the one and only Andrew Maguire.
Welcome to Live from the Vault.
Hi, my name is Shane Moran, and I'll be your host for this week's episode of Live from the Vault. And welcome to the show that goes beyond the headlines and uncovers the truth about the precious metals industry and the effects on the global economy in these historic times. We have exclusive access to experts and insiders, and we reveal information and insights that you simply won't find anywhere else. Now, this week, we have the one and only Andrew Maguire, precious metals expert and whistleblower in the vault. And to help him pull back the curtain, we'll be joined by popular demand, by the way, from our entire Live from the Vault community, good friend of the vault, of course, industry expert Alasdair Macleod is in the house. That's right, Alasdair Macleod is in the vault, and you're not going to want to miss this conversation with Andrew Maguire. So just before we get started here, please help us spread the word about this channel. Hit that like button if you haven't already done it. Share this information and also make sure you're subscribed. Now, if you click on that bell right there, you'll be notified as each episode goes live. Now, for those newer to the community and you haven't met Alasdair yet, he started his career, I'll just tell you a little bit about him, back as a stockbroker in London on the stock exchange in 1970. And subsequently, he's been an investment manager and an executive director for an offshore bank in Guernsey and the head of research for Gold Money. And with that, let's head over to the UK and talking gold with the one and only Andrew Maguire and our special guest, Mr. Alasdair Macleod. Over to you, Andy.
Do you know what, Alasdair? Honestly, I'm so excited when you come on board, and I think this is something. It's very special, and you definitely have a mind that I really love to get into. It is you understand so much of the bigger picture, all the way from monetary history, all the way to and when you distill what's going on right here and right now. It's an algorithm, and really, it's so important to get your view on really what you're seeing now with all of that, all of that knowledge and information. But Alasdair, I know you've been right now. I can't wait to talk to you about this. You've been focusing on something which, of course, the mainstream media is deliberately glossing over. And this is the emergence of a gold-backed commodity currency. This could roll out in several forms, but obviously each one will severely impact this current leveraged paper to physical market gold balance. But I think obviously it's your work on the ruble and backing of the ruble. Now, obviously we've been looking at Glazev's commodity currencies and how forms that take, but this is something worth knowing. Thanks for coming on, Alasdair.
Well, it's very much my pleasure. What can I tell you? The ruble thing is fascinating. I think everybody reckons that. If you sort of follow economic theory and all the rest of it as it's taught in schools, then a higher trade surplus is good for your currency. Well, no, not really, because currencies are actually more driven, certainly in the fiat currency world, which is what we have. They're actually driven by faith and credit in the fiat currency. So as an opener, how much faith and credit does anyone have in the ruble? Zero. And worse than that, if you look at the history of the ruble, really since about the early 1990s, bear in mind that in 1998, they had a 1,000 for 1 consolidation. So if you look at the price of oil in rubles and go back to 1992, then at that time, the ruble price adjusted for that of a barrel of oil was about 7.5 rubles for a barrel of oil. Now it's 7,500 rubles for a barrel of oil. And so you can see how much the ruble has lost purchasing power against the dollar. And the dollar itself, we all know since then, has lost an awful lot of purchasing power measured by gold, which is, if you like, the only honest monetary standard. The idea that forcing up energy prices, which is what Putin and Saudis are doing between them at the moment, the idea that that's going to be good for the ruble, forget it. It's going to be worse for the ruble than it is for the dollar. Because what happens? Forget the trade surpluses, deficits, whatever. I mean, basically, you get out of uncertainty and you get into something which you feel familiar with. In other words, people will sell rubles and buy dollars, which they've been doing already. Even while the price of oil has risen from, where was it? It was negative briefly in April 2020. Yeah. And we're currently looking at 90 going on 100. So, the ruble, I can tell you that the oil price is no friend to the ruble. And this is very, very important because Putin, in conjunction with the Saudis, has embarked on a policy of driving up particularly heating oil prices and diesel, which is its slightly lighter cousin. That is going to have an enormous impact on the inflation rates in the West, as you may imagine. I mean, first of all, heating oil, wow, we're getting into the Northern Hemisphere winter. If you look at diesel, I mean, over 95% of our logistics is diesel. So the higher price of diesel affects the price of virtually everything. But the problem that Putin has, which is what I identified in that article, is that the more he pursues this policy, the more he undermines his own currency. So what that means is that while he can make the Germans shiver in Germany, by God, they'll be damn well freezing in Siberia. And that is potentially politically destabilizing for him. The only thing that Putin can do, and I know that from Sergei Glaziev's writings and all the rest of it, and I know that he has Putin's ear. There's a very famous picture of Putin proudly holding a 400-ounce bar of gold and all the rest of it and looking at it lovingly. I mean, this guy, I think, does understand gold. I mean, perhaps not as much as you and I, but we set a fairly high bar, I like to think, on that one. But Glaziev certainly gets it. And what this means is that as the ruble begins to weaken, and we've got roughly 1 ruble, 1 cent now, I mean, it's damn nearly that, then he is going to be forced to put the ruble onto a gold standard. Now, it's actually quite easy for him to do so. If you look at the underlying economic numbers, I mean, Russian debt to GDP is around about 17.5%. This year, it'll probably go up to about 20. You look at the tax rate is 13% for individuals, 20% for companies. So actually, the Russian economy is in a position where if it had a stable currency, it would be rather like the British economy in 1820, 1830. I mean, with an enormous amount of potential. And I think also that, I mean, if I was in Putin's shoes, I would want to set if you like, something in motion which allows the economy to do well without it having to sacrifice its birthright being all those commodities which are available for export. I mean, you're basically selling the family silver all the time. If you remember, that was what Harold Macmillan said about Maggie Thatcher.
Yes.
This is something which actually is easy to manage. And you will understand this because when the Central Bank of Russia, I mean, I would recommend it splits into two. You've got an issuing side, which controls the interest rate, as it were. And its mandate is quite simple. You use the interest rate to manage the gold stock. That's important. And it gets fully convertible to anyone who wants to exchange rubles back for it. And the way this works, quite simply, is that Russian institutions, Russian banks, will see that at current interest rates, which I think is something like 12% in rubles, what that amounts to is if you go and buy gold in the West, where the lease rate is less than 2%, okay, and you get paid, if you lease your gold, you get paid in dollars, fiat, which is not attached to anything. Instead of that, you can buy that gold, arbitrage it into the issue department of the Central Bank of Russia. And what do you get? You get your gold plus 15%. Or 12%, I think is like, this is enough to do a proper arbitrage. It covers the cost of getting the stuff out of a Western vault into. So I can see that this is the easiest way for them to build reserves, gold reserves, and ensure that the ruble is always on a gold standard and cannot be challenged. And of course, once you do that, this is rather like dropping a nuclear bomb on fiat currencies. This, as far as Russia is concerned, as far as Putin is concerned, would actually elevate his position within Russian history to what we're told he really wants. He wants to be compared with Peter the Great, So you can see this would be his legacy. Very important. But the problem he has, and this is what came out of the BRICs thing, because, even back in January, Lavrov said, that a new gold-backed currency would be on the agenda in August. Why was it not on the agenda? Well, the answer basically is that India and China turned around and said, no, we're not going for this. India is Keynesian. We have been pointing, or the Bank of England has been advising, let me put it that way, the appointment of the Reserve Bank of India governor for decades and decades and decades. They are Keynesian. They turned their back on gold for a very, very long time. They found it a pain in the backside that the people kept on insisting on buying gold as a sort of defense against a declining rupee. Eventually, they started acquiring some gold. Now, whether they've actually got it or not, of course, is something that we can argue about. But you can see that they're not ready for this. And not only that, they don't want to upset us in the Western Alliance because they do a lot of trade with us. They're trying to do a trade deal with us, or are we trying to do a trade deal with them? They've got those links as well as the links into the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, slightly uneasy relationship with China, and so on and so forth. So you can see why they didn't want to go for this. And I think the Chinese equally had a problem because their approach to things is sort of rather evolutionary. They say we've been around for 2,500 years and, nothing gets done in a hurry. And so their attitude is, let someone else make the mistakes and then we will decide policy. So I think that they would probably wait to see what happens to the dollar, what happens to the euro, and so on and so forth, before they are driven to secure the value of the yuan by some sort of gold standard or reference to gold or whatever it might be. And that way, China doesn't get blamed for the problems we have in the West, for exacerbating them, if you see what I mean. So I can understand where they're coming from. But from Russia's point of view, Plan A was a BRICS gold-linked currency. That has not gone forward. They've now got to think about Plan B. How can we secure the ruble? And it's interesting that all the dynamics of this have been completely changed by the Saudi position, who basically share exactly the same view. It's all very well saying, we'll take rupees, but they're damn well worthless in the hands of the Russians and, worth not very much more in the hands of the Saudis. So, this is not a long-term solution to the current geopolitical impasse, if you like, between the Asian hegemons and America.
And I think, so much to this because there's so many ways you can spin off this. Now, if Russia was to do this, and as you say, it's not difficult to do. And obviously there are steps along the way, but not difficult for how are you explaining it? This is achievable. The contagion of that spreading to the likes of China, other jurisdictions, would be that nuclear bomb you're talking about, I think.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, I think that's eventually where they're going. It's a question of how rapidly they progress in that direction. And the position of emerging market currencies is equally interesting. That is that their economies, without the welfare burden, can actually quite easily go on to, let's say, a currency board type arrangement with a more stable currency, be it the ruble or the yuan or something, or even on gold if they've got some reserves themselves. So that can be done. I mean, and it's also important to understand that Africa in particular has evolved now into a completely different animal from what we've been used to in the past. I mean, in the past, the way we kept them in line basically was through, if you like, overseas aid and all the rest of it. We basically bought the politicians, and we take the view a good politician is one who's bought and stays bought. They've moved on from that now, and China in particular has been responsible for achieving that. It's tended to go to countries like Kenya, which is where I was brought up, so I'm familiar with it, and said, we will invest in your infrastructure. We will work on joint projects, and we will advance your economy. And I can tell you the potential of Africa from, all the railways and all the rest of it that are being built is absolutely enormous. I mean, we built a railway from Mombasa up to, I think, Kampala in Uganda. That was, 1912, something like that. It was known as the Lunatic Express because it cost this country quite a lot of money. It was, rather like HS2, but somewhere else. But what are the Chinese doing? They're building a new railway. I think on a wider gauge, because this was a meter gauge railway, and it's going to go all the way into the DRC. You can see what this means. And indeed, if you look at a map of Africa and sort of put on top of it all the communications that China has put in and is planning to put in, it's like looking through a piece of lace at the map of Africa. I mean, it's everywhere, absolutely everywhere. This is a new period, a new phase. It's a new stage in the evolution of Africa into becoming a really productive economy, driven away from tribalism in particular, shedding the legacy of colonialism, which, has good and bad and all the rest of it, shedding the legacy of post-colonial Africa, where we just continue to bribe the guys, Those politicians are becoming a bit more like yesterday. And so I think this is a huge, huge evolutionary step, which is not really fully appreciated in the West. And the other thing, if you look at South America, I mean, I was fascinated to see that Argentina, which has now joined BRICs, was given a $1 billion equivalent loan from China so that it could pay its dollar loan to the IMF. Otherwise, it was going to be yet another default, whatever. So, the basis whereby America goes and buys you effectively by lending you money which you can't pay back, that is now being undermined completely as a policy. And what are the Americans doing about it? I mean, actually, they're pretty helpless in all this. All they can do is sort of thrash around and say, well, we'll go and defeat Putin in the Ukraine. We'll rattle sabers over Taiwan, but realistically, there's nothing they can do, particularly in their financial position.
Yeah, and I think that mentioned, while we're still sort of on the China subject, interestingly, and there's been a lot of chat about this, the lack of the ability to arbitrage up to $120 per ounce premiums. And that's understandable. But I think what's important to understand here, two things going on, really. You've got the COMEX siloed market, where it is designed to suppress the price of gold. And you've got the Chinese market, which have incentivized in two tranches, 2010, buy gold. And funnily enough, when they said that, it never dipped below that price. They kept they guaranteed that price, essentially. And then just a few months ago, opening up to the general population. Whereas before in 2010, we were talking about people who could afford to buy bullion bars. And it was really about that. And then suddenly you're opening up the guy who can click on a mouse and buy a gram or two and invest. And the incentive that China said, this is only, 3 months ago, said, look, and gold was trading at $2,000 an ounce at this point in equivalent terms. And they said, this is the reason to buy this is because of the gold price appreciation you will receive. But there's a circle within a circle here. And I think what they're trying to do is certainly on the fact is we've seen them openly talking about preparing their country for war. And that would be very pragmatic of them, given some of the stuff that's going on. But also to encourage these people to buy the general population now to also buy gold, then and you're also essentially saying it won't go below that price, because if you're saying that you'll get the gold price appreciation, so what we're seeing is really that is going on. They will limit the amount of gold, if necessary, that can enter that market. So you've got the COMEX siloing it down, and they siloing it up, but the amount of gold that's being bought is actually tapping into just one single global supply. So regardless of it being not able to be arbitraged directly, essentially it's having a massive impact. Now, I think two things that come off that is I was going to ask you, and then I want to go over to Moscow, what we're seeing in Moscow. But I guess really I'm of the opinion, my friend Nigel Farage is of the same opinion, and many people I speak to are of the opinion that if China is going to repatriate or invade Taiwan, whichever you want to call it, they would need to do it before Trump was elected. And so, because I think Trump might be a little bit more of an aggressive figure. I think most people think, to be honest, if you've got a window of opportunity, it's while Biden is post-Afghanistan, the inability for US to destroy Russia, direct confrontation with Russia. They're losing credibility. So you kind of wonder, what's your opinion? I really love your opinion on this, because some people think it's going to happen. Yeah. Do you think it'll happen? And obviously, could this be a reason they're building gold reserves ahead of obvious sanctions that would come?
Well, obviously we will see in time, but I take a slightly different view. Okay. The longer term objective of China is to reabsorb Taiwan. But that is essentially a long-term objective. And I think it's an objective which the Chinese would hope to achieve with, maybe persuasion of various sorts, rather than invasion. They will have watched what happened in the Ukraine and seen the difficulties of invading a country which is determined to defend itself. I mean, when you get the citizens defending themselves, that's the sort of hedgehog approach or the porcupine approach, where, you attack the porcupine and suddenly you find, okay, you may be able to attack it, but you get lots of quills thrown at you in the process. It's actually not that viable. And they've also got the further disadvantage that you've got this channel between, the sea channel between them and the island. And that, I think, basically rules out a military objective as the preferred choice, and I think it rules it out also as a preemptive activity. It just wouldn't work. So I think I would discount that. Now, if I was President Xi, I think after all the saber rattling and all the rest of it, I think probably what I would do is I would call a summit with the guys in Taiwan. Maybe not quite at presidential level to begin with, but I would say to them, come on, chaps, look, we're all same ethnic background. Let's work together, and we won't invade you. We'll give you that guarantee. I mean, it's just a very long-term objective that we want to work together. That's, let's just concentrate on that. And then, of course, that opens up all the Taiwanese technology to China immediately. What does America do? Oh my God, this has gone away from us. Help. So I think that would be my approach if I was President Xi. Now, he's probably cleverer than me, so he may not do it. I don't know.
Well, he does walk around with the art of war in his back pocket, by all accounts.
Yeah, well, wisely so. In which case, he will have read The Art of War, that the last thing you do is go and invade a place like Taiwan. I mean,
absolutely. No, you're right.
Yeah.
Really interesting, Alasdair, that, these are really the kind of things we need to be thinking about, So it makes more sense, what you're talking about. Makes far more sense. China doesn't have to react immediately to anything other than they get invaded. But yeah, I mean, these things, I mean, they'll think 1,000 years.
Exactly. It's not their style. I mean, when they absorbed Hong Kong, that was as a result of direct threats by America against Hong Kong. And their intelligence, and we know this because it's publicly available, but their intelligence warned them of the student riots were being provoked by American intelligence agencies back in 2014. They knew all this. They forecast it. The intelligence guys forecast this. It didn't happen immediately, but it happened that autumn. So, they understand the Americans' game. They rather take the view that America is fundamentally weak. It hasn't actually got control over its own politics. And therefore, they can afford to just take the Confucius line. We're around, we've been around. I mean, Confucius was what, 500 BC in our terminal? And, ever since, what have they done? They've just sort of gone with the flow. Everybody else makes the mistakes, and they just defend themselves from those mistakes. And I cannot see that China's thinking is going to change from there. I mean, it is interesting because the one thing that Xi has done is he has jumped down on all the corruption which existed beforehand. And he's done this in such a way where, we look at the West and we think, this is brutal, this is terrible. And, the treatment of Uyghurs. I mean, that only came into the headlines when Trump started promoting it. This is why you shouldn't like the Chinese. So, I think one's got to have, you've got to sort of stand back from this and take a more general view. It's rather like, looking at the sort of debt situation. I mean, in the West, there's so many people who say, well, China's going to go belly up, bust, whatever, and they've got a property crisis. They can handle it all. It never really got out of control. It got a bit extreme, but they can handle it all. And the key behind this, Andy? The key is that they have got, second to Singapore, the highest savings rate in the world. I mean, it's always an approximate figure because it's you take two elements of GDP, work out the difference, and that's your savings rate. But China has a savings rate of around about 40%, and what that means is that people put aside 40% of their money for the future, and this gives an incredible level of stability to prices. I mean, the rate of inflation by CPI in China is zero. But of course, that worries all the Keynesian economists. Oh, it's going to sink into deflation. I mean, what a load of rubbish. They know what they're doing. It's actually a very good economy. And, central government borrowing isn't. I mean, they haven't got anywhere near the levels of us Westerners. I think from memory, because I haven't looked at this recently, but I think from memory, sort of government borrowing is something like 40% of GDP, or outstanding debt is 40% of GDP, something like that. Obviously, there's also a problem with local, regional authorities, as it were. But they're trying to centralize everything, which may or may not be a good thing economically. But, they've got control over things. And, by and large, if as an individual in China, you keep yourself out of politics, I mean, you can do what you want. This is, this is the reality of it. And it's a reality that we've rather lost sight of in our own countries.
it's really enlightening, and I think again, there's usually when I always question when there's a single narrative, and it seems to be. You listen to Bloomberg, you listen to it's definitely centers around very much a single narrative, and much like China, Russia bad, Ukraine good, China bad. It's so basically it's a strange thing, but it is interesting that. That as you say, you just mentioned a 40% number. So the average Chinese saver, forget no savings in America, but the average Chinese person saves something like, as you're saying in round numbers, 40%. But isn't it interesting that they were opened up to gold as a saving class, and this is phenomenal to me because that is actually going to solve so many of the issues when people, yes, the yuan may be up or down in price against the dollar, but the average person, what they see is my gold investment's going up. My gold investment's a very good investment. I think I'll have some more. And I think, again, you're dealing with a mindset there that goes back thousands of years, which is, well, always, I've gifted gold to weddings, to whatever the occasion, birthdays. Gold is given, and it has a spiritual side to it too.
I can put this into I think some sort of modern context, as it were.
Yeah.
I mean, as I understand it, I don't speak Mandarin, obviously, but I'm told that the word for money and gold is exactly the same, and independently of Roman law, which set out things that, gold is money and the rest is credit, and all us Westerners have it as the basis of our common law. It doesn't matter what our governments have said subsequently, that is fact. The Chinese already got there by, different routes, if you like. So, they realized that it is money. Now, after the death of Mao, in 1983, legislation was produced which appointed the People's Bank of China as the sole responsibility of acquiring and managing the state's gold reserves. Okay, so that was 1983. They started accumulating gold at a time when there was a massive bear market in gold, which took it down from, 1983, I think it was about $400-500, something like that, down to 250 or something in 2022. Coincidentally, in 2022, they'd obviously decided that they'd got enough gold. Now, I should also add that they increased their mine output, deliberately invested in mine output, so they became the largest miner in the world by a country mile. They also ensured they continued to have a monopoly over refining, and they were even importing gold from elsewhere, or doré or whatever, and refining it. And did it ever leave? Did it? Hell is like. No, it stayed there. So that was interesting. Now, they obviously decided that they'd acquired enough gold by 2022 to allow people to begin to acquire gold. And that was why the Shanghai Gold Exchange was set up, again, under the control of the People's Bank. It's 100% owned by the People's Bank. So since then, as you rightly pointed out, they've even had television adverts, buy gold, whatever. And, the Chinese people haven't needed a lot of persuading. It's come out of the vaults. What we look at is the Shanghai Gold Exchange deliveries out of the vaults. It's really come out into two markets. I mean, there's a bar market, and at the same time, you've obviously got the jewelry market. So there is a little bit of a dispute. And if you talk to the World Gold Council, they're really concentrating on the jewelry side. But since then, the people have accumulated, I think if you tot it up, something like 21,000 tons of gold on the basis of these deliveries. It is fascinating. Now, how much has have the Chinese state got? Well, I do know from various contacts that this has been stuffed around various accounts, like the youth wing of the Communist Party, the PLA, the People Liberation Army, and so on and so forth. And, I even had one report from someone who knew very well a Japanese businessman who had manufacturing capabilities in China. He was a guest of one of the PLA generals, and the PLA general took him across the compound and, showed him a stack of gold in a warehouse. I mean, it was sort of enormous. Yeah, they've got this gold. And I reckon if you look at the, first of all, the capital inflows, because remember, that's all handled by the People's Bank. And later on, exports, as all the manufacturing investment started producing net exports, I think it's perfectly reasonable to surmise that by 2022, they've acquired something like 20 to 25,000 tons of gold. Bear in mind that there was a huge, great bear market. It was easy enough to, sort of quietly, get this stuff in on falling prices. So under those circumstances, I mean, China, and since then, of course, as you rightly say, no gold ever leaves the country. They've continued to accumulate gold from their mining operations, from their refining operations, bring in doré from other places like Mongolia and so on and so forth. And, the result is that they've probably got, I don't know, somewhere between 25 and 30,000 tons. And that's the state, on top of which there's a further sort of, 20-odd thousand tons in the hands of the public. This is a very, very big slice of above ground stocks. And so they are well protected against the time when Western Fiat currencies actually, meet their Armageddon. The Chinese are already there. It's just they don't want to trigger it. This is the Russians are a lot more aggressive. But as far as the Chinese are concerned, no, we will let the West make mistakes. We will let Western currencies, sink. We will let all that happen. We are not going to aggravate this situation. It's not our style. We will defend ourselves from it when it is absolutely obvious that we've got no alternative but to defend ourselves from a sinking currency regime. And I think that's very important for us all to understand. And we are now in a position where that sinking currency regime is becoming very, very obvious. Interest rates are going to continue to rise. I mean, it's very, very interesting. I mean, people like Jim Grant, I'm told, I was interviewed by someone yesterday and he had Jim Grant on, and he was saying that there seem to be more and more of these senior guys agreeing with me that interest rates are not going to go down. So the reason they go up basically is because currencies are weakening. And in terms of their purchasing power. So if you factor that in, and you factor in a credit crunch, which is the result of banks trying to reduce their balance sheets, and we've seen contraction in money supply in America, also the Eurozone in particular, UK as well. This is basically undermining the economy as a whole, but it's a credit crunch, and that's going to drive up interest rates. I mean, the idea that the Fed has got control over interest rates, forget it. This is a credit crunch. What happens when banks start restricting credit? Well, the first thing that happens is people need more credit. Why? Because their businesses are slowing down and they need cash. So on that basis, this credit crunch has got quite some way to go. What does that do to government finances? Well, it puts America in a real pickle, because, not only are the foreigners, trying to get out of, or they will be trying to get out of US dollar financial assets, because with higher interest rates, guess what? Bond yields rise, which means bond prices fall. It also means that equities get undermined as well. And they've got $32 trillion worth of this stuff officially. On top of that, there's the Eurodollar market, and this is the subject of an article which will be published tomorrow. And it appears that the total size of dollars outside this market is around about 90 trillion. $90 trillion not in the banking system. And of that, 15 trillion is on non-US bank balance sheets. In other words, extra deposits. So The amount of dollars in a crisis that are going to try and get back home where they belong is absolutely phenomenal. And that, of course, will severely and very rapidly undermine the purchasing power, if you like, the faith and credit, put it that way, in that fiat currency.
Yeah, and when we look at the US dollar, obviously the euro dollar market was quite an eye opener to speak to Jeff Schneider the last episode. He's really got, so very few people understand it, and it was interesting. But I think now we're just talking about gold very briefly. Now you're talking about, yes, I must say my information is so much similar to yours. I think it's about 25,000 tons owned by citizens, and I agree it's got to be close to 30,000 tons. I mean, this empirical stuff comes to us through various ways. And I think we're agreeing very closely, somewhere close to 60,000 tons held by China. Now, if you weigh that up against the 8,133 tons,
which may or may not exist.
And it may be there, but how rehypothecated is it? I guess is the question. We don't know. Again, who knows? Because even when Germany wanted their 300 tons back in 2013, it was going to take 7 years initially. Yeah. They wouldn't even allow the Bundesbank to enter the vaults to inspect it. The inspectors in. No, they weren't even allowed to do that. So obviously it smells badly. So where would I better be positioned? Well, clearly, as this currency system, as this air comes out of the fiat system, where would I want to be? Well, I'd certainly want to be in the Chinese camp, and I think it's pretty amazing to me. It's always amazed me how little the average American understands about gold. I mean, obviously, UK slightly better. Germany definitely. Most of Europe, because of obviously they have a history that makes them very much more look at gold as a hedge against trouble. But I mean, it amazes me, Alasdair, that I mean, even down to look at the average Indian farmer. Cycling down a dusty path, there are probably kilos of gold they've inherited, dowries, one thing or another. The average American must own a ring on their finger. If you offered them a gold coin or a Hershey bar, they take the Hershey bar. I mean, it is amazing to me. Just think when gold does find its true value, whatever that is, and it's certainly coming. When it does, where does this tips the balance to the average Indian farmer could go to America and buy land, buy houses. I mean, Lord, when you're talking about potentially, say 10, maybe 5, 7, 10,000, could be anything per us. We don't know. I mean, I'm not even going to guess what it is, but it's a hell of a lot higher than now. So where does that put the average Chinese person? I mean, this is amazing to me that it misses so many people.
Well, if you spread, somewhere between 20 and 25,000 tons amongst 1.5 billion people, it's not quite so much gold as as one might think. But I think the other thing is that an awful lot of people who are gold bugs in our camp are looking at it completely the wrong way. They think that it's an investment, which they buy it, if they're lucky at 1,800 and they sell at 2,000 or something like that. It's not an investment; it's money, and it's the superior form of money to credit, so you acquire it as a hedge against the collapse of the purchasing power of credit. So, as to what the price is going to be, say, in a year or 2 years' time, I would assume that the value of gold is going to be broadly unchanged. But what will happen is the value of credit will collapse. And that obviously gets reflected in, a purchasing, sort of rate, say, between dollars or euros and gold or whatever, which makes you think that gold's gone up. I mean, it's not gold going up. Now, eventually that will happen because, as to your point about the Indian owning some gold, he will then be in a very superior position because a collapse of credit basically puts everything on the market, absolutely everything, and probably at zero value measured in gold. I mean, one of my favorite stories, which I picked up in the autobiography of Stefan Zweig, who is one of the most famous Austrian authors who lived through the Great Inflation, was that in 1923 in Germany, you could have bought a 6-bedroom house in a smart part of Berlin for $100. And what was $100? Well, at 20.67, it was less than 5 ounces. So that is what happens when the value of credit collapses. Forget what the price is in paper marks or paper dollars or whatever it might be. The gold price, you'll find that at that stage, the purchasing power of gold will absolutely rocket. But that's not what we're talking about at the moment. All we're talking about is the purchasing power of unattached credit sinking. And it's going to sink at such rates that not only are high interest rates, I mean, these are not high interest rates anyway. These levels are going to persist and the interest rates are going to go even higher. And if you think about that, the effect on businesses which have over-leveraged themselves debt-wise at zero interest rates, negative interest rates in the European Union, you can see that there is a lot of pain to come. And how are the authorities going to respond to that? Well, let's look at the central banks. They're all in negative equity. Why? Because they ramped up the bond market and then bought bonds right at the top. It's called QE. And now they're deeply underwater and not admitting it. How are they going to rescue banks whose balance sheets come under pressure from falling bond prices in particular, and also non-performing loans? I mean, particularly from the wider economy, because 80% of the economy is small and medium-sized businesses, not the big stuff that always fills the newspaper headlines. I mean, how are they going to do this? I mean, to try and rescue the entire system when the system itself is in negative equity, basically means that you're going to get, a massive expansion of the quantity of senior credit. And it is credit. This is what the central banks issue in the form of notes and also obligations in the form of reserves and whatever to commercial banks. That is a senior form of credit. It's not money. It is credit. And amazingly, I mean, I have so many economists who tell me that no, what the central bank issues and base money is money. It's replaced gold. Oh, come on. They don't understand it. They really don't. There's a very nasty lesson for us all, I'm afraid. I don't welcome this at all, Andy. I think this is going to be terrible. I mean, the poor, and by this I also mean pensioners and all the rest of it, ordinary people who have relied on the state to provide them with pensions and so on and so forth. I mean, they're going to get wiped out. This is not good. This really is not good.
No, you're right. You're right. Now, interesting. Just swinging slightly to a different angle here. I'm central bank digital currencies. I know. Okay, so this is interesting because I mean I have my views, one thing or another, but people say they're coming. That was interesting. My discussion with Jeff Schneider last week, and he kind of made me think. Actually, when you think about it, yes, there's going to be many efforts to do this, but blockchain technology is now out of the bag. Decentralized blockchain technology is out of the bag. Essentially, it's an existential threat to the banking system because why do I need a bank to handle my finances when I have the trustless blockchain? I can do everything on it. I don't need the bank anymore. Interesting. So thoughts on that?
Well, the flaw in that argument, if I may say so,
please,
is that you're putting a fiat currency onto a blockchain. I mean, do you really want it? I mean, forget it.
No, but I think just as obviously, just as a process, obviously we can put any asset onto the blockchain, gold, whatever. But I think in this instance, you're talking about, well, once you've got an automated KYC AML procedure for your fiat currency, currently fiat currency, but really central bank digital currencies are about fiat currencies. So I mean, this is what they're trying to impose on us with this whole social credit system that perhaps goes with it, as Nigel Farage will attest to after being debanked. But it's interesting because I just, again, it's yes, it's dealing with fiat, but it's a stepping stone. Once blockchain technology is out of the bag, you can't put it back. It is accessible to everybody.
Yeah, but I think it's a fashionable argument. Let me put it that way.
Yes, okay.
Let me demolish it. Okay.
Go for it.
I'll say the first thing, and that is that the last time there was a replacement form of currency for something that was collapsing was at the time of the French Revolution. You had the assignat, which was collapsing in value. Everybody hated it. And then they came out with the mandat territoriaux, this new currency. Wonderful. But that was gone within 6 months. So, this idea that you can, replace one fiat or add to one fiat by producing no. It doesn't actually deal with the underlying problem. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is that in terms of implementing this in the way in which the Bank of International Settlements, who set up a committee to look at this and came up with their recommendations. I mean, they want this as a means of the state controlling where the stimulus actually goes to in the economy, which means that the state decides which businesses to support. Well, that's a disaster for a start. But anyway, we'll gloss over that. The problem is that if you're going to do that, then, every business and every person has got to have an account with the central bank. Now, imagine just how long it would take the Bank of England. I mean, the Bank of England have rejected this, incidentally, but if they were to go down this route, how long would it take for them to, sort of set up the software, test it, committee meetings and all the rest of it, the whole thing. I mean, they'd still be looking at it in 10 years' time.
Right.
Now, let's look at the American situation, which actually is probably the most important. So far as I'm aware, every bank in America, every politician in America is bankrolled by the banks when it comes to getting elected, Republican, Democrat or other. Now, are these turkeys going to vote for Christmas? I don't think so. They're not going to vote for something that cuts out the commercial banks. Now, the commercial banks, I think, have kept very quiet on this. I think with very good reason. I mean, if I was, say, on the committee considering this at JP Morgan, I think I would probably dismiss this out of hand or say, well, it's so far away. I mean, you can get, stories like China are trying it out here and whatever, but, this is not national currency stuff at all. I think it was one of the Caribbean islands tried to do this. Barbados tried to do this. Come on, that's not this is not a serious attempt at running, a CBDC. I mean, I don't think it's going to happen for the very simple reason that it's nobody's interest for it to happen. And in any event, the collapse that we're likely to see in the purchasing power of existing fiat currencies, I think, is likely to be so rapid to, if you like, preclude it actually happening in the first place. I mean, particularly if the Russians, as I say, are forced to go down the line of, securing the value of the ruble to gold. I mean, that's going to change everything. It really is.
Absolutely. I think that is kind of full circle to where we started, because that is mind-boggling. And I think most people haven't even thought of that or have dismissed that as implausible. But there's so many little footprints around the way. I was privileged to have a chance to catch up with Gleznev's recent. It was only about 5 weeks ago, I think it was, and he was talking about his two options. The option one, which was not the immediate option, which is a SDR type of basket. And obviously that can't work because of the disproportionate, you can't have, some of these BRICS countries are just, their balance of payments just wouldn't work in a situation like that. However, his major option was to create a 20 commodity, his words, a 20 commodity, and this is recently, 20 commodity gold-backed currency, or at least partially gold-backed currency, which in his mind is going to enable a commodity currency to be equalized. And in the meantime, I don't think it's a coincidence that we are seeing a large premium being offered. Now, this is interesting, a hugely large premium being offered consistently every single day. And this, I know people who are arbitraging this, literally to pay $40 more per ounce for gold, but as a barter. It's nothing to do with cash. This is to do with somebody who wants to buy oil, needs to buy oil on the markets, and they see it at 90, $100, whatever it is. They can go and buy gold at the spot price plus a tiny premium, and literally barter that. And, this trade actually, what people forget, this trade that was launched in March 2022, where there was a grand price, and then it all was very much up in the air as to what was going on, has never stopped happening. And I know of people who are arbitraging this particular trade. And why are they offering that much more? Because they're just swapping the energy for physical. But this bullion is coming into Russia. And I think this is part of a process, to me, of building gold reserves by using your assets. And it's something very interesting. Alasdair, even the spot price at the fixes, I watched the live fixes. The spot Moscow price is always about $3 higher, constantly. But it's currently trading at April futures prices, about $40 above December. Something's going on here.
Well, I think that's fascinating, and it does actually make so much sense. I mean, just put yourself in the shoes of the Saudis, for example.
Yeah.
Are you going to accept? You're going to charge. I mean, the current price of WTI is $90 or something. Are you going to accept Indian rupees for $90 oil?
Nope.
Or are you going to accept, say to someone, well, you can have oil. We'll charge you $70 a barrel if you pay in gold. Well, why not? Go into the market, buy the gold. I mean, you're getting it at a decent discount, if you like, from the market price. So you're linking the price of oil to gold, in a sense. And I think that's the important point that actually you're making behind this. This is going on. And I think this is very much something that I think the Russians understand in particular. Yeah. Can I circle back a little bit on what you were saying about Glaziev? I mean, Glaziev started off with this, basket of commodities and all the rest of it. But I don't think that's practical at all. I mean, really, it's not practical. I ran a number of tests on the gold price, looking at commodities priced in gold going back to, as far as I could. I mean, I got IMF statistics back, I think, to about 1992. I would have liked to have gone further, but that was as far as I could go. And it was quite clear that priced in gold, I mean, commodities were sort of, doing that. Just sort of, there were fluctuations, yeah, but they were very small compared with the fluctuations in paper currencies. And today they haven't risen over time. And if you look at the price of oil in particular, from 1992, the price has fallen by roughly 30% measured in gold. So now this is a very important point, because looking at it from the point of view of the Saudis and the Russians and the Iranians, the West is ripping them off to the tune of 30% compared with the oil price back in the early 1990s. So, yeah, this is why they would be keen to sell. I mean, they could quite easily rather than accept a rubbish currency, they can, quite afford to give a discount because they know that, the price of oil measured in gold is low. The answer basically is you accumulate gold. And then at some stage, the value in terms of what you produce, whether it's oil or other commodities or whatever, will actually increase. So this way you're divorcing yourself completely from the West's fiat currency system. And I think that's a very important point. So what you've said there, I think, is something that everybody should actually take note and think about.
And we're right back to to where we circled, where we started, which is essentially the backing of the ruble with gold, and all of these little pieces of the puzzle seem to all add up. But Alasdair, whenever you come on, by the way, I do owe you a lunch, and I do. Whenever you come on, it throws so many thoughts up in the air. We could go on and on and on, but you've given us an hour of your time, and I really do thank you for sharing with us these thoughts. And I love to get these opinions because it's a balance of where, to discern what's going on, you need all sides of the picture. And you really helped us today and our subscribers to look at the other side of the picture here and look at the wider side of the picture. But thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, no, thank you and Kinesis for helping me spread the word, because really, ultimately, what I want is people to understand what is actually going on, understand what money is and what credit is, and understand, therefore, how they might protect themselves from what I see as being some very, very violent financial events in the not too distant future. Thank you very much indeed for giving them the platform to be able to do that.
Well, as Robert Kiyosaki said when he came on our show, how much physical do you own? Well, I know you do, but that's a question for our subscribers. Indeed. I think that's the only question to know.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I agree with that entirely.
Thank you, Alasdair.
Thank you very much, Andy.
All right. Thank you, Andrew Maguire and Alasdair Macleod, for another fascinating discussion. And remember, to our whole community, buy physical and make sure it's 1-to-1, and understand the difference between what Andy affectionately calls the casino paper gold and silver markets and the actual physical gold and silver markets. They're not the same. Don't be fooled. So there you have it. That's all we have for you today on another amazing episode of Live from the Vault. Now, please help keep spreading the word about this channel by hitting that like button if you haven't already done so. Share this information and subscribe if you haven't subscribed. And if you click on that bell right there, you'll be notified as each episode goes live. And with that, we'll see you next time right here on Live from the Vault. See you then.